Can you push me a little? Richard Bennett had just begun to turn away when a faint voice rose from the end of the aisle. He looked back. Among the crowded rows of chairs sat a young black woman in an old, worn wheelchair. Her thin hands rested on the scuffed wheel rims, her fingers trembling slightly from exhaustion. "Excuse me, were you speaking to me?" Richard asked. Annie Carter glanced toward the stage, then back at him. There was an embarrassment in her eyes that Richard had not yet taken the time to notice. "Could you push me over there a little, sir?" she asked softly. Just close enough to reach the ramp to the stage. Lakeview Community Hall had been decorated beautifully that evening, as though light and color alone could drive away the bitter cold of an Ohio winter. Green pine garlands hung along the railings. Silver paper snowflakes turned slowly beneath the chandeliers. Volunteers in red sweaters moved through the crowd, handing out hot apple cider and sugar cookies to the families gathered for Bennett Forward's annual Christmas gift-giving day. On the stage, directly beneath a banner bearing Richard Bennett's name, sat a brand-new electric wheelchair. A golden ribbon had been carefully tied around one of its armrests. Attached to the handle was a white card printed in large letters: Annie Carter, Academic Achievement and Mobility Support Award. Richard looked at the card, then down at the old wheelchair beneath the young woman in front of him. "Where's your family?" he asked. "My mother brought me here," Annie replied. But she had to go back to work. She couldn't afford to miss another shift. At that moment, a woman wearing a communications headset hurried over to Richard's side. "Mr. Bennett, they need you backstage. Your speech begins in 90 seconds, and the television crew is ready." Annie heard every word. Her hands tightened on the wheel rims, shame spreading across her face. She knew she was inconveniencing an important man. She knew all the eyes around them might already be turning toward her, but she had no other choice. "Please, sir," Annie said again, her voice quieter this time. "This chair is stuck. My legs are too weak. I can't push myself over there." She looked toward the stage, where the golden bow gleamed beneath the lights. "They're about to call my name so I can receive the gift." Richard folded his arms and looked down at the battered wheelchair. "You still have two hands, don't you?" he said. His voice was not exactly cruel. He was simply in a hurry, too accustomed to other people handling their own problems, so that he could step onto the stage and do the part everyone considered important. That was what made his words hurt Annie even more. "Use your hands and push yourself forward a little," Richard continued. "Once you get close to the ramp, a volunteer will help you onto the stage." Annie stared at him, as though she could not believe what she had just heard. "I already tried, sir." "Then try again," Richard replied. "There are plenty of volunteers around here." With that, he turned and walked away. "Mr. Bennett, please wait." Richard had taken only 2 steps when he heard the sound of metal scraping against carpet behind him. Annie pressed both palms against the wheel rims and pushed with all the strength she had. Her narrow shoulders rose beneath her thin coat. The wheelchair jerked sharply to one side, dragged forward a few inches, and then came to an abrupt stop. Annie's body pitched forward. She quickly grabbed the armrest to keep herself from falling out of the chair, then drew in a long, painful breath. Richard stopped walking, but he did not fully turn around. "Please," Annie said, her voice breaking now from exhaustion. "Please, Mr. Bennett. It won't move." She tried a second time. Her fingers turned white as she gripped the rims. The jammed wheels scraped uselessly across the carpet, making a dry, grating sound. But the chair refused to move. Annie's breathing grew rapid and uneven. The few yards between her and the stage ramp suddenly seemed like a steep hill her body no longer had the strength to climb. "I'm trying," she choked out. "I really am trying, but I can't make it move." Near the aisle, 2 young women had been watching the entire exchange. One held a cup of hot apple cider. The other wore a green sweater with a volunteer badge pinned to her chest. The woman holding the cider frowned and looked directly at Richard. "Mr. Bennett, she looks exhausted," she said. "You're already heading toward the stage anyway. It would only take you a few seconds to push her there." Her friend nodded. "She's the person who's supposed to receive that wheelchair." Richard's expression hardened. Several guests nearby began turning their heads in his direction. The first young woman tilted her head, her voice edged with sarcasm. "Unless Mr. Bennett isn't strong enough to push a wheelchair." Her friend gave a humorless laugh. "Maybe he only knows how to stand beside them for photographs." Their laughter was not loud, but it was loud enough for Richard to hear every word. Before he could respond, the host's voice suddenly rang out through the speakers, filling the hall. "And now we are deeply honored to recognize an outstanding student from East Cleveland, Miss Annie Carter." Applause erupted throughout the room. Everyone turned toward the stage, expecting the fortunate young woman to appear and receive the gift that would change her life. But Annie was still trapped at the far end of the aisle. She did not look at Richard. She did not look at the two young women who had spoken up for her. She looked only at the brand new electric wheelchair waiting beneath the stage lights, at the soft golden ribbon tied around its armrest, at the gift she had imagined proudly showing her mother after her mother finished her shift at the nursing home later that night. Slowly, Annie placed her hands back on the wheel rims. "Come on," she whispered to herself. "Please." The wheelchair moved forward less than an inch before locking in place again. Her right hand slipped from the rim and struck the metal frame. Annie gasped and pulled her hand back into her lap, cradling it in pain. Nearby, a little boy gently tugged on his mother's sleeve. He was no more than 3 years old, wearing a blue puffer jacket, with one small mitten dangling from a cord at his wrist. His mother carried him on one hip while a heavy diaper bag hung from her shoulder. "Mommy," he asked, his innocent voice rising through the applause, "why isn't she going up there?" The mother looked at Annie. In a single moment, she understood everything. Without hesitation, she crossed the space between them. "Sweetheart," she said gently, shifting her little boy higher on her hip, "let me help you. I'll push you up to the stage." Annie looked at the child clinging tightly around his mother's neck. Then she looked at the heavy bag slipping farther down the woman's shoulder. A faint, weary smile touched her lips. "No, ma'am," Annie said. "Thank you, truly. But you're carrying your little boy. I don't want you to fall, or for him to get hurt." The mother frowned with concern. "I can put him down for a moment." But the little boy immediately wrapped both arms tightly around his mother's neck, startled by the loud speakers and the noisy crowd around him. Annie shook her head. "It's all right. You came over here to help me, and that alone means more than you know." She turned her face toward the stage, trying not to let anyone see her biting her lip to hold back tears. She had turned down the only person willing to help her, not because she did not need that help, but because even in her most humiliating and helpless moment, she was still thinking about someone else's burden before her own. The two young women near the aisle looked from the mother holding her child to Richard. The volunteer gave a short laugh. But this time there was no humor in it. "Look at that," she said. A woman carrying a child and a full bag was still the first person willing to step forward and help. The woman holding the cider spoke more loudly now, loud enough for several nearby guests to hear. "Meanwhile, Mr. Bennett has 2 perfectly healthy arms and an entire television crew waiting to show everyone just how generous he is." Her friend folded her arms across her chest, imitating the way Richard had stood in front of Annie only moments before. "Careful," she said coldly. "Helping her with your own hands might make your kindness look real." A few people laughed, but there was nothing playful about the sound. It was sharp, cutting. It echoed through the open space between Richard and Annie, leaving him unable to pretend he had not heard. Richard stood motionless. In front of him, a mother carrying an exhausted little boy had still been willing to cross the aisle and help a stranger. And Annie, even while trapped, even while the entire hall was beginning to look at her, even while the gift bearing her name waited only a few yards away, was still worried that the woman might grow tired, might fall, might accidentally hurt her child. And he, the man whose name was printed in enormous letters above the stage, the man who was about to walk into applause for his compassion and generosity, had looked at that young woman and told her to try harder. Annie placed her hands on the wheel rims once more. This time, before she could even push, she had to stop to catch her breath. Her face had grown pale with exhaustion. The wheelchair remained perfectly still. Richard looked at the young woman sitting beneath the banner that bore his name. Then he looked at the brand new electric wheelchair on the stage, the gift he was about to present to her in front of the cameras, after refusing, only minutes earlier, to help her cross the short distance needed to receive it. The applause in the hall began to fade. People were starting to realize that Annie had not appeared on stage. Without saying a word, Richard turned away from the backstage entrance. He began walking toward Annie. Annie saw Richard walking toward her. Her breathing was still uneven. She cradled her aching right hand in her lap, the knuckles reddened from striking the metal frame. For one anxious moment, Annie wondered why he had come back. Had the young women's mocking comments embarrassed him? Was he returning to tell them to lower their voices? Or was he simply going to inform her that a volunteer was on the way to help? But Richard did none of those things. He stopped beside Annie's wheelchair, his hands hanging at his sides, his face no longer carrying the impatient expression it had only minutes earlier. "Miss Carter," he said quietly, Annie looked up at him. Richard glanced down at the front wheel, which was twisted slightly to one side, then back at her pale, exhausted face. "Let me take you to the stage." Annie did not answer immediately. The mother holding the little boy was still standing nearby, one hand gently resting against her child's back. The two young women who had criticized Richard also watched in silence, as though waiting to see what he truly intended to do. Finally, Annie spoke softly. "You don't have to do that, sir. I know you need to be on stage." Richard gave a slight nod. "Yes, I do need to be on stage." He paused for a moment. "And so do you." Annie lowered her gaze to her hands resting in her lap. "I didn't mean to hold up your program." "You didn't hold up anything." Richard drew in a deep breath. "I did." The answer caught Annie by surprise. Richard stepped behind her wheelchair, but he did not immediately place his hands on the handles. "May I push you?" he asked. Annie felt her throat tighten. It had been a long time since anyone had asked her that question. At home, her stepfather usually grabbed the handles of her wheelchair and pulled her aside whenever he thought she was in the way. In crowded places, strangers sometimes moved her without saying a word, as though she were nothing more than an inconvenient piece of furniture that needed to be shifted out of their path. But this time, Richard stood there and waited for her answer. Annie blinked, then nodded gently. "Yes, sir." Richard placed both hands on the push handles. The moment he tried to move the wheelchair, he immediately understood why Annie had struggled until she was exhausted. The front wheel was twisted out of alignment and caught firmly in the thick carpet. He had to carefully tilt the chair to one side, apply more force, then gently straighten the wheel. A sharp click sounded when it finally came free. Annie startled, quickly gripping the armrests with both hands. "I'm sorry," Richard said at once. "Did that hurt you?" "I'm all right, sir." She looked down at the wheel that had finally been freed, as though it had betrayed her in front of the entire room. "It does that sometimes." "Sometimes?" Richard asked. "When the carpet is too thick, or when the sidewalk is uneven, or when it rains." Annie gave a small shrug, seemingly embarrassed to explain. "Usually when I'm in the greatest hurry." Richard's hands tightened around the handles. He had seen the old wheelchair. He had noticed the chipped paint, the flattened cushion, and the worn armrests. But it was not until he tried to push it himself that he understood how hard this young woman had been fighting against it every single day. The mother holding her child smiled at Annie. "Go get your gift, sweetheart." Annie turned her head toward her. "Thank you for wanting to help me." The woman shook her head gently. "You don't have to thank someone for seeing what should have been obvious from the beginning." She adjusted her little boy on her hip. "Now go enjoy your moment." The little boy raised his mittened hand and waved at Annie. "Bye, wheelchair lady." Annie laughed. It was the first time she had smiled since her name had been announced across the hall. Richard began pushing the wheelchair down the aisle. The crowd quickly parted to make room for them. Whispers rose throughout the room. Some people looked at Annie with sympathy. Others looked at Richard with expressions he no longer wanted to avoid. As he passed the two young women from earlier, the one holding the cup of hot cider lifted it slightly, her voice filled with sarcasm. "That's right, Mr. Bennett. Looks like you finally found your strength." Her friend covered her mouth and gave a quiet laugh. Perhaps, in the past, Richard would have stopped. Perhaps he would have replied with a cutting remark, a dismissive smile, or a reminder of exactly who they were speaking to. But this time, he simply continued pushing Annie toward the stage. "They're not wrong," he said quietly. Annie turned her head slightly to look over her shoulder. "Did they embarrass you?" "No," Richard replied. "I embarrassed myself." Annie turned forward again in silence. She did not know what to say to a man who had just admitted his failure so openly. The distance from the end of the aisle to the stage was not far, perhaps 20 feet, a little more because Richard had to carefully guide the wheelchair toward the ramp. For him, the journey took less than a minute, but for Annie, it seemed much longer, because every pair of eyes in the hall was now watching a movement she had not been able to make for herself. Halfway down the aisle, Annie lightly touched the red scarf around her neck. Her mother had tied it for her before hurrying back to her shift. "My mother is going to be so sad she missed this," Annie murmured. Richard leaned forward slightly so he could hear her more clearly. "She couldn't stay? My mother works the afternoon shift at a nursing home." Annie looked toward the new wheelchair on the stage. "She's had to ask for schedule changes too many times whenever my chair broke down at school. She couldn't ask again." She gently smoothed the scarf around her neck. "But she brought me here. Before she left, she told me that when they called my name, I had to sit up straight." Richard saw Annie lift her shoulders slightly, trying to straighten her back in the old chair. "I think your mother would be very proud," he said. because you are doing exactly what she told you to do." Annie pressed her lips together. His words nearly broke through the last of her composure. As they approached the stage, an event coordinator hurried toward them, her expression caught somewhere between confusion and anxiety. "Mr. Bennett, we've been looking everywhere for you. Your speech has already been delayed." She glanced at Annie. "We can take Miss Carter from here." Richard looked at Annie, then at the coordinator. "That won't be necessary," he said. "I'll take her up." The coordinator hesitated for a moment, then quietly stepped aside. When they reached the foot of the ramp, Annie suddenly reached back and gently touched Richard's sleeve. "Please wait a moment." Richard stopped immediately. "Is something wrong?" Annie looked up at the stage. Bright white lights shone down on the brand new electric wheelchair. Television cameras were pointed directly at the ramp. The entire hall had now turned to look at her. "Could I have a moment, please?" she asked softly. "I didn't realize everyone would be looking at me before I even made it up there." Richard carefully turned the wheelchair at a slight angle so Annie could see him without having to twist around. "Take all the time you need." Annie gave an uneasy little smile. "But everyone is waiting. Then they can wait for the person they came here to honor." Annie studied him for a long moment, as though trying to decide whether his words were sincere or simply another kind gesture offered for the cameras. But Richard was not looking toward the lenses. He was only standing there, waiting for her. Annie lowered her head and smoothed the front of her coat. She adjusted the red scarf her mother had tied around her neck. Then she placed both hands neatly in her lap and drew in a deep breath. "All right," she said. "I'm ready." Richard returned to the back of her wheelchair and slowly pushed her up the ramp. When Annie appeared on stage, the applause began again. This time, it was no longer scattered or polite, as it had been when her name was first announced. It was fuller now, louder and longer, as though everyone in the room finally understood that they were not simply welcoming a young woman who was receiving a gift. They were witnessing how much she had already endured just to be there. The brand new electric wheelchair stood only a few feet from Annie, its golden ribbon gleaming beneath the stage lights. The host raised the microphone, his voice trembling slightly with emotion. "Ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm round of applause for Miss Annie Carter." The applause grew even louder. Richard pushed Annie's old wheelchair beside the new one, then slowly stepped back, giving her the space this moment deserved. Annie stared at the gift in front of her. Her eyes moved over the clean cushion, the shining controls, and the golden ribbon she had been dreaming of for months. Then she whispered, unaware that the nearby microphone had picked up her voice. "Mom, I did it." The entire hall fell silent. No one coughed, no one whispered, not a single chair moved. Richard stood a few steps away from Annie, heard those 4 simple words, and felt as though something inside him had just broken open. If Annie's story touched your heart, please like this video and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories of kindness, courage, and justice. The microphone carried Annie's whisper farther than she intended. "Mom, I made it." For a moment, no one clapped. The hall seemed to recognize that those words belonged to someone who was not in the room. Annie realized the microphone was live and drew back, embarrassed. "I'm sorry." The master of ceremonies, a cheerful man in a burgundy blazer, lowered his cue cards. "There is nothing to apologize for, Miss Carter." A woman near the front pressed a tissue to her cheek. Someone farther back began applauding, softly at first. The sound spread through the room until it surrounded Annie, but this time she did not feel like an object placed under a spotlight. She sat straighter in the old chair, the red scarf resting against her coat, and looked at the powered wheelchair beside her. Richard remained a step behind her. A staff member motioned for him to stand beside the new chair for the presentation photograph, but he did not move until Annie glanced toward him. "Would you like me here?" he asked. She seemed surprised by the question. "Yes, sir." "That's okay." He moved to her side rather than behind her, leaving the center of the stage to her. The host spoke into the microphone again. "Annie Carter is a senior at East Cleveland Central High School. She was nominated for today's Student Achievement Mobility Award by her school counselor, Mrs. Dorothy Lane. For academic excellence and determination in the face of challenges most of us never have to consider." Annie kept her eyes on the new chair. It had a padded back, clean tires, a compact battery beneath the seat, and a small control stick on the right armrest. Her current chair required every trip to begin with a calculation. How far, how steep, how tired she might become before she got home. The chair beside her looked like the first answer she had ever been given that did not begin with the words "maybe someday." Richard followed her gaze. "Have you ever used one like that before?" She shook her head. Only once at the therapy clinic, when I was younger. The insurance wouldn't cover it after that. And the chair you have now? My mother found it secondhand. Annie touched the tape around the armrest as if apologizing for it. She kept saying she'd save for another one. But something always came first. Rent, groceries, heat. Richard had heard families speak about those choices in annual reports. He had read phrases such as transportation barriers and limited household resources. He had never heard them spoken by an 18-year-old trying not to make her mother sound poor in front of a room full of strangers. The host gestured toward the new wheelchair. "Would you like to try it, Annie?" She hesitated. "I don't know how to transfer without my mother here." A volunteer started forward, but Richard raised a hand gently. "Do you have someone trained to assist her?" The volunteer stopped. "Our equipment specialist is backstage." "Then please bring her," Richard said. "We are not rushing this." Annie looked up at him. Earlier, he had asked her to push harder because he had no time to stop. Now he was making a room full of people wait until she could move safely. A minute later, a rehabilitation technician named Claire came onto the stage and introduced herself to Annie before touching either chair. With Annie's permission, Claire locked the brakes, positioned the new seat close, and guided her through the transfer using a sliding board. Richard stepped back, watching Annie's expression instead of the cameras. When Annie settled into the powered wheelchair, she ran her fingers along the armrest. Claire showed her the control stick and asked her to try moving forward a few inches. Annie pressed it carefully. The chair moved. No grinding front wheel. No pull against her shoulders. No scrape that announced her struggle to everyone nearby. It simply went where she directed it. She stopped, startled, then tried again, turning in a small, careful half circle. A laugh escaped her. It was brief, almost unbelieving. "It moves before I get tired," she said. The sentence went through Richard with more force than the laughter from the aisle had. He turned his face slightly, swallowing before speaking. "It should have a long time ago." Annie looked at him, then down at the chair. "This means I can get to class by myself next year. College? If I can afford it." She caught herself and gave a small smile. "I mean, if everything works out." Richard heard the habit in that correction. She did not say when. She said if, as though wanting too much might make the gift disappear. "What do you plan to study?" he asked. "Social work." The host lowered his microphone a little. "That is a fine calling." Annie nodded. "There are kids at my school with disabilities who stop asking for things because adults make them feel difficult. I thought maybe, if I knew the system, I could help them ask anyway." Richard looked over the edge of the stage. Sarah stood near the front row, her arms no longer folded, listening closely. Before he could answer, a woman hurried through the side entrance of the hall. She was in her early 60s, bundled in a brown wool coat with snow melting along the shoulders. She held a leather folder against her chest and searched the stage until her eyes found Annie. "Annie," she called. Annie turned in the new chair. "Miss Lane?" Dorothy Lane came as close as the security rope allowed. "I am so sorry. The bus stalled on Euclid, and I thought I'd missed everything." "You almost did." Annie smiled, then glanced at Richard. "But I got some help." Dorothy took in the new chair, the crowd and Richard standing beside her student. Her face softened. "You look exactly where you belong." The host invited her onto the stage after learning she was Annie's school counselor. Dorothy climbed the ramp, hugged Annie carefully, and turned to Richard. "Mr. Bennett, thank you for honoring her. I'm beginning to think I arrived late to that responsibility," he said. Dorothy studied him for a moment, then opened the folder. "Annie has a 3.8 grade point average. She has been accepted conditionally to Cuyahoga Community College. She wrote one of the strongest personal essays I have read in 36 years of education." Her voice lowered. "The only reason she has not committed to attend is money and reliable transportation." Annie shifted in her chair. "Miss Lane, you don't have to tell everyone that." Dorothy placed a hand lightly on her shoulder. "I am not telling them what you lack, sweetheart. I am telling them what should never be allowed to stop you." Richard looked from Dorothy to Annie. The girl who had asked him for 20 feet had been measuring an entire future from the end of that aisle. He reached for the microphone. "Miss Carter," he said, "before this program ends today, I would like to discuss one more award with you and your mother. Not because you were stranded back there, because from what I have just heard, you have earned far more than a photograph with a new chair." Annie's fingers tightened around the control stick. For the first time that afternoon, the distance ahead of her did not look impossible. Richard did not make the announcement immediately. He had built too much of his life around quick promises made under bright lights. Promises that sounded generous before anyone had counted their cost or considered the person receiving them. He handed the microphone back to the host and bent slightly toward Annie. "Would you be comfortable waiting here for a few minutes while I speak with my sister and Miss Lane?" Annie looked uncertain. "Am I in trouble?" The question landed harder than he expected. "No," he said. "Absolutely not. I want to be certain that anything I offer is real before I say it in front of this room." Dorothy Lane nodded with approval. "That is a fair answer, Annie." Claire, the rehabilitation technician, remained beside Annie while she practiced moving the new chair a few feet at a time across the stage. At first, she handled the control stick as if it might punish the smallest mistake. Then she made a careful turn, stopped neatly beside the old chair, and looked down at her hands. "They don't hurt," she said quietly. Dorothy heard her. Her mouth pressed into a line, and she looked away for a moment. Near the curtain, Richard spoke with Sarah in a low voice. "Can we establish a scholarship today?" Sarah held his gaze. "We can fund one. We cannot invent an award in 5 minutes, just because you feel guilty." "I know. Do you?" Her voice softened, but only a little. "That young woman does not need an apology, shaped like a check." Richard glanced toward Annie. She was listening as Claire explained the charger, nodding at each instruction as if committing it to memory. "Then help me do this properly." Dorothy joined them with Annie's folder in hand. "Her application is complete except for final financial aid review. I submitted her FAFSA materials with her mother 3 weeks ago. Her family contribution will be close to zero. She qualifies academically. What she lacks is the portion grants will not cover: books, transportation, and a laptop that does not shut down every time she opens a second document." Sarah opened the folder and scanned the pages. "She has already been accepted, conditionally. She has until January to confirm enrollment. And you are certain this is what she wants?" Dorothy looked toward Annie. "Ask her. She is used to people discussing her life as if she is not in the room." Sarah closed the folder. "Then that is what we do," Richard nodded. For once, he felt no urge to control the moment. "Bring her mother in however we can. She should hear this from Annie, not from the evening news." Annie was still practicing when Sarah approached her. "Miss Carter, would you allow us to call your mother?" Annie's face changed at once. "Did something happen?" "No. Something may be about to happen, and your mother should be part of it." Annie reached into the canvas bag that had been transferred from her old chair to the new one. Her phone screen was cracked across one corner. She tapped her mother's name and waited. Monica answered on the 4th ring, speaking quietly over the sounds of carts and distant voices. "Baby girl? I only have a minute. Did they call you yet?" Annie smiled, and this time there was no stopping the tears that came with it. "They did. Mom, I'm sitting in the new chair right now." There was a pause, then a small broken laugh from the phone. "Does it fit you? It moves so easily. I can turn it by myself. Miss Lane is here too. Thank the Lord." Monica sniffed and lowered her voice. "Take a picture for me, all right? I hate that I missed it." Annie glanced toward Richard. "There's more. Mr. Bennett wants to talk to both of us." Monica became cautious. "About what?" Richard stepped close enough to speak, but not close enough to take the phone from Annie. "Mrs. Carter, this is Richard Bennett. May I speak with you on Annie's speakerphone?" "Yes, sir. Is my daughter all right?" "She is more than all right. I have just learned what kind of student your daughter is, and I would like your permission for our foundation to consider her immediately for an educational award. The paperwork will be reviewed properly. Nothing depends on cameras or publicity." Monica did not answer for a few seconds. "Sir, I appreciate what you gave her today, but Annie does not want people feeling sorry for her." Annie stared down at the gold ribbon on her armrest. Richard replied, "Neither do I. Mrs. Carter, I nearly failed your daughter today because I did not stop long enough to see her. I do not intend to make a second mistake by treating her work as charity." Dorothy leaned near the phone. "Monica, he has her records. This is about college." A sound left Monica that was half breath, half sob. "Annie, I didn't ask for it, Mom." "I know you didn't. They said it would be reviewed." "Then you let them review it," Monica said. You don't turn away from a door just because somebody finally held it open. Annie wiped her cheek with the edge of her sleeve. Okay. When Richard returned to the microphone, the room settled quickly. Annie sat beside him in her new chair, Dorothy standing just behind her. Sarah remained off to one side with Annie's folder held against her chest. Richard did not read from a speech card. Ladies and gentlemen, this afternoon I was prepared to talk to you about generosity. Before I could do that, Miss Annie Carter had to remind me what it looks like. Annie glanced down, but he continued before the room could turn her discomfort into spectacle. She was selected for this mobility award because of her achievement, not her hardship. She has earned admission to Cuyahoga Community College, where she intends to study social work. After full review of her records, Bennett Forward will fund a 2-year Rising Scholar Award covering tuition not met by aid, required books, accessible transportation, and a laptop for her coursework. The applause came fast, but Annie lifted her hand slightly. Richard saw it and offered her the microphone. Her voice shook once, then steadied. I'm grateful, but I need people to know I don't want this because anyone feels bad for me. Richard nodded. Then tell them why you want it. Annie looked out across the room. I want it because my mother has worked enough for both of us to survive. I want to go to school so one day I can help families like mine spend less time begging for what they should have had a fair chance to reach. This time the applause did not embarrass her. From the phone resting in her lap, Monica's voice broke through the noise. That's my girl. Annie pressed the phone to her heart. Richard stood beside her, silent now, understanding that the most important thing he could do in that moment was not speak over the future she had just claimed for herself. The applause stayed with Annie even after the microphone had been taken from her hands. It followed her down the ramp in a softened murmur, through the smiles of strangers and the flash of a camera she had not known was pointed in her direction. She was grateful when Claire guided her toward a quieter corner beside the stage, away from the crowd and the lights. Let's make sure this chair is set for you before you leave, Claire said. The seat depth looks right, but I want to adjust the footrests. Annie nodded, still holding her phone against her chest. Monica had ended the call only after making Annie promise to send photographs from every angle and to keep her gloves on when she went outside. For the first time all afternoon, Annie wished she could stop the clock. Her mother should have been there. She should have seen the chair move. She should have heard the room rise when Annie spoke. Dorothy crouched beside her. Your mother heard the part that mattered. Annie looked down at the gold ribbon. She should not have had to hear it from a break room. No, Dorothy said. She should not have to choose between being present for her child and keeping the lights on. That is not your fault, Annie. Annie nodded because it was easier than answering. Across the room, Richard was supposed to be greeting sponsors. Instead, he stood with Sarah near the edge of the stage, watching the equipment specialist adjust Annie's chair. His communications director spoke rapidly into her headset, attempting to restore the event schedule, but Richard no longer appeared concerned about it. Sarah handed him Annie's folder. The scholarship can go through formal approval Monday morning. Her academic record qualifies her. The foundation will need documentation from the college and final transportation estimates. Make sure the award stays hers even if she never agrees to a single interview. Sarah looked at him. That should have been the policy already. I know. Do you? Richard did not take offense this time. I'm learning. A photographer approached Annie and asked whether she would pose beside Richard with the old chair placed on one side and the new one on the other. Annie looked at the old chair, its black tape and worn cushion visible beneath the stage lights. Her stomach tightened. She did not want the thing that had carried her through school to become a sad prop in somebody else's photograph. Richard noticed her silence. Not unless she wants to, he said. The photographer raised his hands. Of course. I only thought the before and after image would be powerful. Annie answered before Richard could. My old chair isn't something to be ashamed of. My mother found it when I needed one. Dorothy's face softened. The photographer lowered his camera. Understood. My apologies. Richard stepped nearer. Would you like a photograph of you in the new chair? Just you? Annie considered it, then nodded. One for my mother. Claire removed the oversized gold ribbon from the armrest, so Annie could rest her hand comfortably near the controls. Dorothy smoothed the shoulder of Annie's coat. Annie adjusted the scarf Monica had tied that morning, lifted her chin and smiled. The photographer took one picture. Can I see it? Annie asked. He turned the camera screen toward her. She studied the image for a few seconds. There was no one behind her. No hand on her shoulder. No expression asking people to pity her. She sat centered in the frame, scarf bright against her coat, her new chair angled toward the open aisle. "Send that one," she said. Richard gave the photographer Sarah's contact information, then waited until Annie had sent the photograph to her mother. The reply came almost at once. "Look at my beautiful girl. I knew you would make it." Annie smiled at the screen, then blinked quickly. "You all right?" Dorothy asked. "Yes." She tucked the phone into her bag. "I just wish she didn't have to go back to work tonight after all this." Richard hesitated. "Would it help if I arranged a ride home for both of you when her shift ends?" Annie's shoulders became guarded. "We can take paratransit." "I did not mean you cannot manage." "I know." She looked at him, careful but not unkind. "It's just that sometimes people help once, then suddenly they want to decide everything." Richard absorbed the words without defending himself. "Then let me say it differently. The offer is there only if your mother asks for it." That eased something in her face. "Thank you." Claire finished the adjustments and explained the charger, the battery gauge, and the emergency call feature mounted beneath the right armrest. "Press and hold this button if you fall, get stranded, or feel unsafe. It links to the assistance service included with the chair." Annie ran a finger across the button. "Unsafe where?" "Anywhere," Claire said. "Help is not something you are only allowed to ask for in public." The word stayed with Annie longer than Claire could have known. When the hall began to empty, Dorothy collected Annie's old wheelchair for transport, and Sarah arranged for the new chair to fit securely inside an accessible van. Richard walked beside Annie toward the exit, leaving a respectful distance between himself and the controls. Outside, early evening had darkened the windows. Snow had begun falling again, fine and dry beneath the parking lot lamps. Annie's phone rang. She smiled when she saw her mother's name, but Monica's voice sounded hurried when she answered. "Baby girl, I may be another hour. Mr. Wilkins fell, and we're short-staffed. Are you someplace warm?" "I'm still inside. Miss Lane is here. They're getting me a safe ride home." "Good. Keep your coat zipped. And Annie?" "Yes?" "I am so proud of you." Annie swallowed. "I'm proud of you too, Mom." When the call ended, Richard saw the happiness leave her face almost as soon as it had arrived. "Long shift?" he asked. "Most of them are." He wanted to say something useful, but no sentence could give Monica back the hours she had spent working through her daughter's important moments. The accessible van arrived at the curb. Annie guided her chair forward herself, then stopped before the lift. "Mr. Bennett?" "Yes?" "Thank you for coming back." Richard looked at the snow collecting along the pavement. "I should never have walked away." Annie gave a small nod. "No, you shouldn't have." Then she moved on to the lift, leaving him with the honesty of the answer. Across town, in the dim living room of the Carter apartment, Leon Hayes sat with a bottle on the table and the evening news playing too loudly. When Annie's photograph appeared on the screen beside Richard Bennett, his expression hardened. He did not see his stepdaughter's achievement. He saw a new chair, a scholarship, and a door beginning to open without him. The van reached the Carter apartment building a little after 8. By then, the snow had begun sticking to the sidewalks, covering the old salt stains in a clean white layer that would turn gray by morning. Dorothy stepped out first and spoke with the driver while the lift lowered Annie to the pavement. The new chair moved without a shudder when Annie guided it forward. She still expected the old pull to the right, the sudden resistance of a wheel that made every curb feel like an argument. Instead, the chair followed her hand smoothly. "Look at you," Dorothy said, smiling as she walked beside her. "You are already handling it better than I handle my car." Annie laughed. "It's easier when the thing actually listens." The laugh faded when she saw the light in the apartment window. Leon was home. The blue flicker of the television lit the living room curtains, and even from outside she could hear the volume turn too high. Dorothy followed her gaze. "Would you like me to wait until your mother gets back?" Annie shook her head too quickly. "I'll be fine. Mom should be home soon." "Annie, he mostly just talks." She forced a smile. "And I have homework I need to pretend I'm going to do tonight." Dorothy did not smile back. She pulled a card from her handbag and placed it in Annie's canvas bag. "My home number is on the back, not the school office, my house. Call any hour, understand?" "Yes, ma'am. And let your mother know I would like to meet with both of you about college paperwork." "I will." Dorothy waited until Annie reached the front door. Only after Annie waved did she turn toward the van. The apartment smelled of beer, fried onions, and stale heat. Leon sat in his usual place on the sofa, one boot on the coffee table, the television remote in one hand and a glass in the other. Annie's photograph filled the screen behind a reporter's voice. Local student Annie Carter received more than a mobility award today when businessman Richard Bennett announced a new scholarship commitment. Leon muted the television. Annie stopped near the door, one hand still on the chair control. "Well," he said, looking over the new chair. "There she is, the celebrity. Hi, Leon." He set his glass down and leaned forward. "That thing cost money?" "It was donated through the foundation." "That wasn't my question." Annie removed her gloves slowly. "I don't know how much it costs." "And the scholarship?" "It pays for school." He let out a short laugh. "School? Of course." He stood and walked toward her, his steps uneven. "Your mother's out scrubbing old folks while you come rolling home in a machine worth more than our car. And nobody thinks maybe this family could use some actual cash. It isn't money I can take out." "You ask?" "No." "Why not?" "Because it's for college, Leon." He stopped in front of her. His eyes were damp and red, his breath carrying the sweet, sour smell Annie had known since Monica married him. "You think you're going to college now because some rich white man pushed you under a spotlight?" Annie lowered her eyes to the bag on her lap. "He gave me a chance," she said. Leon laughed again, louder this time. "A chance at what? Social work? You going to teach people how to sit around waiting for handouts?" Her fingers tightened over the bag strap. "I earned the award. You earned a sad story. That's what those people bought today." He nodded toward the television. "Girl in a wheelchair, hard-working mother, poor little family, makes everybody watching feel decent for 5 minutes." The words sank deeper because they touched the fear she had carried away from the stage. She had asked Richard whether the scholarship was pity. He had answered her in front of everyone. But Leon had a way of taking the smallest doubt and pressing until it hurt. The front door opened behind her. "Move your feet away from the threshold, baby girl, it's slippery out there." Monica entered carrying a grocery bag and wearing her navy scrubs beneath an old winter coat. Snow clung to the shoulders of her coat and the toes of her work shoes. She looked tired enough to sit down on the floor, but the moment she saw Annie in the new chair, fatigue gave way to wonder. "Oh, Annie." She set the grocery bag on the table and came straight to her daughter, kneeling carefully to see the chair. "Let me look at you." She brushed one braid away from Annie's cheek. "Is it comfortable? Did they adjust the feet? Can you reach everything?" Annie nodded. "It's perfect." Monica put one hand over her mouth, laughing through tears. "I wanted to be there. I know. I saw the picture 3 times during my break." She kissed Annie's forehead. "My girl on that stage." Leon picked up his glass. "Yeah, well, your girl came home with a bunch of promises and no money toward the rent." Monica's back stiffened. She rose slowly. "Not tonight." "Why not tonight? Everybody else gets to talk about how inspiring this is. I'm the only one in this apartment allowed to notice we still have bills." "The scholarship is not for your bills. It's for a fantasy," Leon said. "You really think she's going to go off to college and start some career? Somebody is always going to have to haul her around, fix her problems, push her through doors." Annie went still. Monica crossed the space between them before Leon could take another drink. "You do not speak to her that way." He stared at her, surprised less by the words than by the force behind them. "I'm telling the truth. No, you're standing in front of a young woman on one of the best days of her life and trying to make her ashamed because you have done nothing with yours." The apartment seemed to lose all sound except the muted television. Leon's face changed. "Watch yourself, Monica. I have watched myself for years." Her voice shook, but she did not lower it. "I watched how I asked you for help. I watched how quiet Annie stayed when you were drinking. I watched every dollar while you sat there and complained about what this child needed. I am done watching you make her feel small." Annie had never heard her mother speak to him that way. Pride rose beside fear, and the two feelings left her unable to move. Leon shoved his glass onto the table hard enough that liquid spilled across the wood. "You think one rich man's attention makes you better than me?" Monica stepped between him and Annie's chair. "No," she said. "My daughter did that all by herself." Leon grabbed his coat from the back of the sofa and yanked the door open. Cold air pushed into the room. "This place gets real expensive without me," he said. Monica looked at the unopened bills beneath the sugar bowl. Then she looked at Annie. "It has always been expensive with you." Leon slammed the door behind him. For several seconds, Monica did not move. Then her shoulders dropped, and Annie saw how hard she was trembling. "Mom?" Monica turned at once. "I'm all right." "No, you're not." Her mother tried to smile. It failed. Annie guided the chair forward and reached for her hand. "I'm sorry," Annie whispered. "Maybe if I hadn't been on the news." Monica knelt beside her so quickly Annie stopped speaking. "Do not finish that sentence." She took Annie's face gently between her hands. "Nothing good that happened to you today belongs to him. He does not get to ruin it, and he does not get to make you apologize for it." Annie's eyes filled. "What if he comes back angry?" Monica looked toward the closed door, then at the new wheelchair, the gold ribbon still folded in Annie's bag. "Then I will have to decide what kind of home I want my daughter coming back to." Outside, snow continued falling over the ramp by the front steps. Inside, Annie sat in a chair that could finally carry her forward, while her mother faced the first truth neither of them could afford to ignore any longer. A new road meant very little if Leon was still waiting at the end of it. Leon did not come home that night. Monica checked the lock twice before pushing the small kitchen table against the door, an act that made Annie feel safer and more frightened at the same time. Her mother insisted on making dinner, though it was nearly 10 and neither of them was hungry. She warmed canned tomato soup in a saucepan and made grilled cheese sandwiches with the last 4 slices of bread. "You need to eat something," Monica said, placing a plate on Annie's lap tray. Annie broke one corner from the sandwich but did not lift it to her mouth. Her new wheelchair stood steady beneath her, quiet and clean in a room that suddenly seemed too cramped for anything new. "Do you think he'll come back?" Monica sat across from her at the kitchen table. "Probably." "Angry?" Her mother looked at the door. "Probably that too." Annie lowered the sandwich. "Then maybe I shouldn't keep the chair here." Monica turned back to her. "What does that mean? If it wasn't here, he wouldn't have anything to get mad about. And if I don't take the scholarship, maybe the news stops talking about us." For a second, Monica seemed too tired to respond. Then she reached across the small space between them and covered Annie's hand with her own. "Leon was drinking before you got that chair. He was cruel before Mr. Bennett knew your name. Do not take something good out of your life and offer it up as payment for a grown man's bad choices." "But he said," "I know what he said." Monica's voice hardened. "He has spent years making every good thing feel expensive. That does not make him right." Annie stared at the soup, watching a thin skin form on its surface. Monica stood, moved the table away from the door and checked the lock again. "You sleep in my room tonight. We'll keep your phone charged. In the morning, I'll make some calls." "What kind of calls?" "The kind I should have made sooner." Annie did not ask more. Her mother looked frightened enough already. By morning, snow had covered the warped wooden ramp outside their apartment. The radiator clanged. Leon's side of the sofa remained empty, and Monica sat at the kitchen table with a yellow legal pad, her work schedule, and a number Dorothy had given Annie months before for family assistance at the school district. Monica had barely begun explaining their situation to the woman on the phone when the nursing home called. A co-worker was sick. They needed Monica early. "I can't come in early today," Monica said. Annie looked up. Her mother had never said those words without apologizing first. The supervisor's voice was loud enough to be heard from several feet away. Monica listened, closed her eyes, then answered, "I understand, but I cannot leave my daughter alone today." When the call ended, she sat still for a moment. "Are you going to lose your job?" Annie asked. "I don't know." The guilt returned so quickly Annie felt it in her chest. She looked down at the control stick beneath her hand, then at the canvas bag hanging from the side of her chair. Sarah Bennett's card was inside it. "Mom, I need to do something." Monica reached for the coffee pot. "Right now, you need breakfast. I need to call the foundation." Her mother stopped. Annie removed the card and turned it over in her hands. "I can't have you losing work and fighting with Leon because everybody saw me on television. I can use my old chair. Miss Lane can help me look for other aid later." "Annie, I know what you said last night. I know none of it is my fault, but that doesn't mean I can sit here and watch everything get worse." Monica leaned against the counter, one hand holding the coffee mug too tightly. "You think giving back your future will keep this family together?" "I think it might make things calmer. Calm is not the same thing as safe." Annie could not answer that. A knock sounded at the door. Both of them froze. Monica walked toward it slowly, looking through the narrow window beside the frame before opening it. Dorothy Lane stood outside carrying a canvas tote bag and brushing snow from the shoulders of her coat. "I hope this isn't a bad time," Dorothy said. Monica let out a breath Annie had not realized she was holding. "Come in. Please." Dorothy stepped inside and placed the tote on the counter. I brought muffins and the college forms we talked about. I also brought the number for a family advocate, because I worried about the way Annie described things at home. Monica looked at her daughter. Annie's cheeks warmed. I didn't say much. You did not need to, Dorothy said gently. Young people become very skilled at describing a storm without naming the rain. Monica covered her mouth briefly, then turned away. Dorothy removed her gloves. Has Leon been here since last night? No, Monica said. But he'll come back, and you do not feel safe when he does. Monica shook her head once. Annie gripped Sarah's card. Before we do any of that, I want to return the scholarship. Dorothy sat down across from her. She did not react with surprise or disappointment. Tell me why. Because everything changed after yesterday. No, Monica said quietly. Everything showed itself after yesterday. Dorothy nodded. Your mother is right. The scholarship did not create the problem. It gave you enough light to see the problem was already in the room. Annie's eyes filled. What if people only gave it to me because they saw me stuck in that aisle? Dorothy opened her folder and placed a copy of Annie's transcript on the table. Next came her college acceptance letter, her essay, and 3 recommendation letters. These existed before Mr. Bennett pushed your chair, she said. Your work was already done. His job now is to keep the door open honestly. A black SUV stopped outside. Annie stiffened until she saw Sarah Bennett step out from the passenger side. Richard emerged from the driver's side carrying no camera crew, no flowers, only Annie's old canvas lunch bag. Monica looked at Dorothy. Did you call them? I told Sarah there may be a family issue, and Annie needed to speak with them somewhere private. Richard knocked and waited on the ramp until Monica opened the door. Mrs. Carter, he said. I'm sorry to arrive uninvited. Annie left this yesterday, and my sister said there was a conversation we should have before any paperwork moves forward. He handed Annie the lunch bag. Inside, beneath the crumpled wax paper around her uneaten sandwich, was the note Monica had written the day before, in blue ink. Sit tall, baby girl. You earned today. Love, Mom. Annie read it twice. Richard stood a few feet away. I hear you are thinking of giving back the scholarship. She nodded without looking up. I don't want it if it belongs to the girl everyone felt sorry for. Good, he said. That made her raise her head. Richard set a folder on the table. Because that girl does not exist. This belongs to the student whose teachers recommended her, whose grades qualified her, and whose plans were already in motion before I failed her yesterday. Annie held his gaza. He added, I pushed your chair 20 feet. You carried yourself 18 years. Please do not confuse those two things. Outside, an old pickup truck turned into the parking lot and stopped beside the curb. Monica saw it first. Leon had come home. The pickup door slammed outside hard enough to make Annie's hands close around the folded note in her lap. Monica stood between the kitchen table and the living room window. Through the thin curtain, Leon came up the salted walkway with his coat unzipped and his shoulders pitched forward. His boots struck the wooden ramp without care. When he reached the door, he did not knock. He pushed his key into the lock and twisted it. Richard moved half a step toward Annie, then stopped himself. This was Monica's home, Monica's decision. Mrs. Carter, Sarah said quietly, do you want us to leave, or do you want us to stay? Monica looked at Annie, then at the door as Leon shoved it open. Stay, she said. Leon stepped inside carrying the smell of cold air and whiskey. He stopped when he saw the room, Dorothy at the kitchen table, Sarah beside the counter, and Richard Bennett standing a few feet from Annie's new wheelchair. For an instant, surprise sobered his face. Then it hardened. Well, look at this, he said, pulling off his gloves. The whole rescue committee showed up. Leon, not now, Monica said. Not now? He shut the door behind him. I come home and find strangers sitting in my living room talking about my family. And you think I should come back later? Dorothy rose from her chair. Mr. Hayes, I'm Dorothy Lane, Annie's school counselor. I didn't ask. Richard kept his voice level. Mr. Hayes, I'm here because Annie had questions about her scholarship. Leon gave him a slow look. I know who you are. Saw you on television. Standing next to my stepdaughter like you discovered her. Annie lowered her eyes. Monica noticed. Do not speak about her that way. Leon ignored her and looked at the powered chair. So this is it. This is the big miracle everybody's crying over. It is mobility equipment Annie earned through the program, Sarah said. Earned. Leon walked closer. That's a nice word for it. Richard stepped slightly into his path. There is no reason for this conversation to happen in front of Annie if you cannot speak respectfully. Leon laughed once. You don't walk into my home and tell me how to talk. It's my home too, Monica said. Leon turned toward her. Then maybe you should have asked before inviting people here to discuss how to get rid of me. No one answered. His face changed as the silence confirmed what he feared. So that's it? One day with a rich man and suddenly you two have plans? Annie found her voice. This isn't about Mr. Bennett. Leon swung back toward her. You stay out of this. She is the reason there is a this, Monica said. She deserves to speak. Leon stared at Annie. Then at the folder on the table. He snatched it up before Dorothy could reach it, flipping through the scholarship papers with rough, impatient movements. Tuition, transportation, computer. He shook the pages. All this money, going to a girl who may never even make it through one semester. Annie flinched. Richard took a step forward. Put the papers down. Or what? Leon said. You'll buy another family? Monica reached for the folder. Give me that. Leon jerked it away, then saw the canvas bag hanging from Annie's chair. The gold ribbon from the ceremony was tucked inside, its edge visible above the zipper. He laughed under his breath. You think this chair means you can just roll out of here and leave everything behind? Annie looked at him. I think it means I can go to school. His hand closed around the push handle of the wheelchair. Leon, Monica warned. He ignored her and pulled the chair backward. Annie startled as the wheels rolled suddenly beneath her. Stop, she said. Richard moved forward, but Sarah caught his arm. Do not touch him unless he hurts her. I'm calling 911. She already had her phone in her hand. Leon dragged the chair toward the narrow storage closet beside the kitchen. You want to see how much independence this machine gives you when it's locked up? Annie grabbed the control stick and tried to move away, but Leon had reached down and switched off the power. The chair went still. Let go of my chair, Annie cried. Monica rushed between them and seized Leon's wrist. Get your hands off my daughter. He shoved her aside. It was not a punch, but Monica hit the edge of the table and caught herself with one hand. Dorothy cried out and went to her. Annie's face went white. Richard stepped in front of Leon. His voice was low now. You will not put your hands on either of them again. Leon squared himself, but his eyes flicked toward Sarah, who was speaking quickly into her phone, giving the address. You called the police on me? He shouted. No, Monica said, holding her reddened wrist as she stood upright. Your behavior did that. Leon glanced toward the door, then back at Annie's chair. He grabbed the handle again, as if taking control of it was the only power left in the room. Annie remembered Claire's instructions at the convention hall. Press and hold this button if you fall, get stranded or feel unsafe. Her right hand shook as she felt beneath the armrest. Her fingers found the emergency button. She held it down. A quiet tone sounded from the chair. Leon looked down. What did you do? Annie lifted her chin. Her breathing was quick, but her words were clear. I asked for help. For a few seconds, nobody moved. Then, faint at first, and quickly louder. A siren approached through the falling snow. Leon released the chair as though it had burned him. You ungrateful little... Finish that sentence, Monica said, stepping in front of Annie again, and say it clearly for the officers when they come through that door. The knock arrived less than a minute later. Cleveland Police. Open the door. Sarah opened it. Two officers entered. A broad-shouldered man and a woman in her 50s whose gray-streaked hair was pulled back beneath her cap. Her eyes went first to Monica's wrist, then to Annie, then to Leon. I'm Officer Helen Price, she said. Nobody is going anywhere until I understand what happened. Leon began at once. This is my house. These people came in here filling their heads with... Officer Price raised one hand. Sir, I asked for quiet. For the first time that night. Leon obeyed. She walked to Annie and lowered herself slightly, so they were nearly eye level. Miss, are you hurt? Annie swallowed. No. He took control of my chair. He was going to lock it in the closet. He pushed my mother when she tried to stop him. Officer Price looked at Monica. Ma'am? Monica's voice trembled only on the first word. Yes, and I do not feel safe with him here anymore. Leon shook his head. Monica, don't do this. She turned to him, her wrist pressed against her chest. I should have done it sooner. The male officer guided Leon toward the door while he protested that everyone had turned against him. Officer Price remained with Monica and Annie. explaining that they could request an emergency protection order and that a family shelter with accessible rooms had space for them that night. Monica stared at the apartment. The unpaid bills under the sugar bowl, Annie's old chair near the wall, the sofa where Leon had spent years drinking away every apology he owed them. Then she went to the bedroom and returned with a small duffel bag. Annie watched her place the red scarf, her college folder, and the gold ribbon inside. "Mom," Annie whispered, "where are we going?" Monica came to her chair and touched her cheek. "Somewhere you never have to ask permission to move forward." Outside, the snow had thickened, but when Annie drove her new wheelchair down the ramp toward the waiting accessible van, its wheels did not catch once. The accessible van carried them through streets softened by snow, past closed storefronts, dark porches, and traffic lights changing for almost no one. Annie sat secured near the window, her new chair locked into place on the floor. Monica sat beside her with the duffel bag between her feet, one hand resting on the handle as if everything they had managed to save could still be taken if she let go. Richard and Sarah followed in Richard's SUV. Dorothy had promised to call in the morning. Officer Price had stayed at the apartment long enough to arrange the emergency shelter placement and explained that Leon would not be permitted to return while the incident report was being processed. Annie had nodded at every instruction. She had thanked everyone. She had driven herself down the ramp without crying. Now, as the van moved farther from the only home she remembered, her composure began to thin. "Mom?" Monica turned. "I'm right here. Where will you go to work from? We'll work that out. What about your uniform? Your winter boots? The bills? Tomorrow, Annie. But you only packed one bag." Monica reached over and took her hand. "Tomorrow." Annie looked out the window. Snow gathered on bus benches and bare tree branches. "If I hadn't pressed that button, we'd still have our apartment." Monica's grip tightened. "If you hadn't pressed that button, I might still be teaching you to live around a man who had no right to frighten either of us." Annie lowered her eyes. The answer did not remove the ache in her chest. It only made it harder to argue. Harbor House Family Shelter occupied a brick building beside an old Methodist church. It was not hidden, but it did not advertise the reasons women arrived there after dark. A ramp had been cleared and salted before the van pulled up. Warm light shone through the glass entrance. A woman in a plum-colored cardigan met them inside. She was in her 60s, with silver hair cut close to her chin and reading glasses hanging from a chain. "I'm June," she said. "You must be Monica and Annie." Monica shifted the bag in her hand. "Yes, ma'am. First thing, no ma'am needed unless I've earned it." June smiled at Annie. "And second thing, we have a room on the first floor with a roll-in shower. Door handles, not knobs. Plenty of turning space. I checked before you arrived." Annie blinked. Usually accessibility was something she had to ask about and then apologize for needing. "Thank you," she said. June led them down a quiet hallway. The building smelled of laundry detergent and baked pasta. A television played low in a shared living room where two women sat folding children's clothes. Neither stared as Annie passed. Their room held two narrow beds, a small dresser, a lamp, and a window facing the church parking lot. It was plain, but the doorway was wide enough for Annie to enter without scraping her rims. She moved into the room and turned once in a full circle, testing the space. June noticed. "Enough room?" Annie nodded. "Yes. Good. Nobody should have to reverse out of their own bedroom." Monica gave a tired laugh that dissolved too quickly. June pretended not to notice and lifted the duffel bag onto one bed. "I'll bring towels. There's macaroni and cheese left in the kitchen, and I can heat cocoa. You don't need to tell me anything tonight that you aren't ready to tell. Safe first. Explanations later." After she left, Monica sat on the edge of the nearest bed. For the first time since the police arrived, she seemed to allow the weight of the night to reach her. Her shoulders sagged. The red mark on her wrist had darkened beneath the fluorescent light. Annie guided her chair closer. "Let me see your hand. It looks worse than it feels. That's what you always say." Monica gave her a weary smile. "Maybe you got that from me." Annie took her mother's wrist carefully. The sight of the bruise made her stomach twist. "I brought this home," she said. Monica pulled her hand back, not in anger, but so quickly Annie understood she had said the one thing her mother could not bear. "No, he was mad about the chair, about the scholarship, about Mr. Bennett being there. He was mad because he could see us becoming less afraid of him." Annie stared at the chair controls. "Maybe I should give the scholarship back anyway. Maybe if things calm down." "Stop." Monica leaned forward. Do not hand Leon your college education as a peace offering. Do not hand him this chair. Do not hand him one more piece of you and call it keeping the peace. Annie's lip trembled. I don't want your life to be harder because of me. Monica rose from the bed and knelt in front of her, despite her tired knees and aching back. You are not why my life is hard. She held Annie's hands between both of hers. You are my daughter. Loving you has never been the burden. The burden was waking up every day trying to keep one grown man from making you feel unwanted in your own home. Annie tried to look away, but Monica would not let her retreat into silence. You hear me, baby girl? He did this. Not your chair, not that scholarship, not you. The tears Annie had swallowed in the hallway, on the stage, in the apartment, and in the van finally came. She bent forward, and Monica gasped. A gentle knock came at the door. June stood there carrying a tray with 2 mugs of hot chocolate and 2 plates of macaroni and cheese. Behind her were Richard and Sarah, their coats dusted with snow. Richard did not step inside until Monica lifted her head. I'm sorry to come this late, he said. Sarah spoke with the shelter director. We only wanted to make sure you arrived safely. Annie wiped her cheeks with her sleeve. We did. Richard looked at the room, then at Monica's bruised wrist. His expression tightened, but he did not ask for details. Annie had already been forced to give police. Monica stood. Mr. Bennett, I appreciate all you have done, but I don't know what happens next. Neither do I, he said. Not entirely. But Sarah has a family advocate coming in the morning. Legal aid, accessible housing, transportation for Annie's college appointments. Nothing will be decided without you. Sarah placed a folder on the dresser, and the scholarship is still Annie's. Tonight does not change that. Annie looked at Richard. Everything got worse after you helped me. He received the words without flinching. It may feel that way tonight. It is true. No, Monica said quietly. Richard glanced at her, then back to Annie. Your mother is right. I did not create what was happening in your home, and neither did you. What happened today only made it impossible for the rest of us to pretend we could not see it. June handed Annie a mug of cocoa. Drink before it gets cold, sweetheart. Big decisions do poorly on an empty stomach. Annie wrapped both hands around the warm cup. The room was unfamiliar. Her clothes were in one bag. Her old life had ended without warning. But for the first time in years, no one on the other side of the door was shouting her name in anger. Monica sat beside her with a mug of her own, and Annie allowed herself one careful sip of something warm before facing morning. Morning came quietly at Harbor House. Annie woke before her mother and lay still for a moment, listening for the sounds she had learned to expect at home. A bottle set too hard on a table. Leon coughing on the sofa, the mutter that meant everyone should stay out of his way. Instead, she heard a cart rolling down the hallway and June speaking softly to a child who did not want oatmeal. The new wheelchair was charging beside her bed. Its small green light blinked steadily. Annie watched it until Monica stirred in the other bed and sat up with a hand pressed to her stiff neck. How's your wrist? Annie asked. Monica glanced at the bruise as if she had hoped it would disappear overnight. Sore. Manageable. You should have a doctor look at it. I will. Annie studied her mother's face. You're going to work? Monica looked toward the folded scrubs in the duffel bag. I need to call my supervisor first. Before she could reach for her phone, there was a knock. June entered carrying a tray with coffee, toast, scrambled eggs, and a bowl of grits. I believe in serious conversations after breakfast, she said, setting the tray on the dresser. Also, your family advocate is here whenever you're ready. Her name is Marisol Vega. She knows the courthouse, housing office, and every bus route in this county better than the people who run them. Monica smoothed her hair back. I don't know what I'm supposed to say to her. The truth usually gives her enough to start with. June replied. Marisol met them in a small office near the shelter entrance. She wore black slacks, a gray cardigan, and a pin shaped like an open door. She shook Monica's hand first, then turned to Annie. Would you prefer I sit over here, or across from you? Annie looked at the uncluttered space near the desk. Across is fine. Marisol sat. Officer Price sent the incident report this morning. Because Mr. Hayes pushed your mother and tried to deprive you of mobility equipment while intoxicated, we can ask for a temporary civil protection order today. It would prohibit him from contacting either of you, or coming to this shelter, your future residence, or your school. Monica wrapped both hands around a paper coffee cup. Would Annie have to testify? Not today. She may answer a few questions if the magistrate asks, but I can request accommodations and keep this brief. Marisol looked at Annie. You do not have to prove that you were frightened enough. What happened matters. Annie nodded, though her stomach tightened. What about our things? My school papers are still there. My mother's uniforms. An officer can accompany your mother later, or arrange a supervised pickup. You will not go back there alone. The word alone settled over the room. Annie had been doing many things alone for so long that she had almost forgotten it was not a requirement. Richard and Sarah arrived just before they left for court. Sarah carried the scholarship documents in a plain folder, while Richard held 2 winter coats donated through a shelter supply room rather than wrapped as gifts. Only if you need them, he said, placing them on a chair. June told us some families arrive without enough layers. Monica nodded. Thank you. Richard did not ask to come to court. He only said, Sarah and I will be at the foundation office. Marisol has both our numbers. Whatever support you choose, we'll follow your lead. Annie looked at him. You're not coming? I can, if you want me there. But I do not want a courtroom full of people thinking this is about a billionaire protecting you. Your mother is protecting you. You are protecting yourself. Annie considered that, then said, maybe come later, when we know where we're going. Richard gave a small nod. I will. The Cuyahoga County Courthouse was a stone building that made Annie feel smaller as soon as she entered. Security took longer because officers examined her chair carefully. But Marisol remained at her side, explaining each step before anyone touched anything. In a plain hearing room, Monica sat beside Annie before a magistrate with silver-framed glasses. Officer Helen Price submitted her report and described the condition of the apartment when police arrived. Leon intoxicated. Monica's wrist reddened. Annie's powered wheelchair turned off and being pulled toward a closet. The magistrate looked at Monica. Miss Carter, do you believe Mr. Hayes poses an ongoing threat to you or your daughter? Monica's fingers trembled in her lap. Annie reached over and laid her hand on them. Yes, Monica said. I do. The magistrate turned toward Annie, her voice gentler. Miss Carter, I understand your stepfather attempted to take control of the wheelchair you use for mobility. Is that correct? Annie's throat felt dry. Yes, ma'am. How did that make you feel? Annie glanced at her mother, then at Marisol, like he was trying to make sure I couldn't leave unless he allowed it. The magistrate wrote something down. That is enough, she said. The temporary protection order is granted. Monica closed her eyes. Annie did not feel relief all at once. Relief came slowly, in pieces. When Marisol handed Monica the stamped papers, when Officer Price explained Leon could not legally approach them, when no one asked Annie whether they had overreacted, outside the courtroom, Monica leaned against a wall and began to cry. I'm sorry, she said, pressing a hand over her mouth. I thought I'd feel stronger than this. Officer Price, who had stayed to help with the order, handed her a packet of tissues. Courage is not the part where you don't shake, Miss Carter. It's the part where you show up shaking and still say what needs saying. Annie looked at the older officer and stored the sentence somewhere she knew she would need it again. The weeks that followed were filled with forms, phone calls, and small decisions that had once seemed impossible. Monica collected their belongings with a police escort. She returned with Annie's textbooks, 2 framed photographs, her work shoes, and the sugar bowl that had held down overdue bills on their kitchen counter. Leon was not there. Dorothy helped Annie complete her enrollment confirmation for Tri-C and apply for federal student aid. Sarah arranged for the scholarship to cover the remaining tuition, accessible transportation, books, and a reliable laptop, all through formal approval that carried Annie's name, not Richard's favor. Marisol found an accessible 1-bedroom apartment with a small alcove Monica insisted would be Annie's study space. It sat near an accessible bus route and had a concrete ramp wide enough for Annie's chair without anyone needing to angle her through the doorway. On moving day, June arrived with a foil-covered dish of macaroni and cheese. Dorothy brought a second-hand bookshelf. Officer Price, off-duty and wearing jeans beneath her winter coat, placed a bag of groceries on the counter. Richard came last, after Annie invited him. He carried a small wooden plaque. Carter home. Monica ran her fingers across the letters before hanging it beside the door. Annie guided her chair into the living room, turned without scraping a wall, then moved to the window where sunlight fell across the empty study alcove. Richard stood behind her, careful not to reach for the handles. Enough room? He asked. Annie smiled faintly. Enough room to start. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Sarah's name appeared on the screen. followed by a message about the Foundation's upcoming winter event. Richard read it, then looked at Annie's clear doorway, the level floor and the ramp outside. For years, his foundation had counted chairs delivered and photographs taken. He understood now that a chair was useless if the life around it remained full of locked doors. He typed one reply to Sarah: "Cancel the old program format. We are rebuilding it from the ground up." By late February, the snow along Cleveland's curbs had turned into narrow ridges of gray ice, and the banner outside Lakeview Community Convention Hall no longer carried Richard Bennett's face. It read, "Bennett Forward Access Day, designed with the people it serves." Annie noticed the difference before she entered the building. The curbside drop-off lane had been widened. A volunteer in a blue vest stood near the accessible van, not reaching for her chair, but asking, "Would you like directions, assistance, or room to handle it yourself?" Annie smiled. "Directions would be great. Registration is through those doors." Then left. "Everything's on one level." Monica walked beside her with a proud expression she was trying, unsuccessfully, to keep under control. She had taken the morning off after giving her supervisor 3 weeks' notice and refusing to apologize for it. Her coat was still the old brown one, but she wore a yellow blouse. Annie had helped choose from a thrift shop, and her work-worn hands held a small purse instead of a lunch bag packed for a second shift. "Do not start crying before we get inside," Annie warned. "I'm not crying. You've been blinking hard since the parking lot. The wind is cold. It is 46 degrees. Monica cleared her throat. "Then it is an emotional wind." Annie laughed as she guided her chair through the doors. The building looked familiar enough to stir something in her stomach, but it no longer felt like the room where she had been stranded. The center aisle was wider, with clear signs directing guests to equipment demonstrations, college counseling, accessible transportation registration, and family legal support. A quiet room had been added for guests who needed relief from the crowd. The stage remained, but the ramp now curved gently from both sides and was wide enough for 2 wheelchairs to pass without one person being pushed aside for another. Near the refreshment table, June from Harbor House lifted a paper cup of coffee in greeting. Dorothy Lane stood beside her in a plum-colored coat, talking to Officer Helen Price, who had come in plain clothes and looked almost embarrassed when Annie waved at her. "You invited half of Cleveland," Annie said to her mother. Monica smiled. "People wanted to see you somewhere happy." Sarah Bennett approached carrying a slim folder and a name badge on a lanyard. "Good morning, Annie. Your speaker badge is inside, and your honorarium paperwork has been processed. It should reach your account by Friday." Annie blinked. "You really didn't have to pay me." Sarah handed her the badge. "You are advising a foundation. We pay advisors. We stopped asking people to donate their hardship for free." Monica gave Sarah an approving nod. "That is a sentence I like." Sarah smiled. "Your brother would agree. He has heard it several times." Richard was near the stage, speaking with a father whose teenage son used a motorized chair. Instead of a suit, he wore a gray jacket with an event badge clipped to the pocket. He listened while the father pointed toward the transportation booth, then wrote something on a card and handed it to Sarah when she joined him. Only then did he notice Annie. He walked over, stopping a few feet from her chair. "Miss Carter, you made it." Annie raised an eyebrow. "All by myself from the front door. I was hoping you would." He shook Monica's hand. "Mrs. Carter, thank you for coming. You gave my daughter a microphone," Monica said. "There was never a chance I'd miss this." Richard laughed softly. "Fair warning. She may have a few things to say about the way I used to run events." "She should," Monica replied. When the program began, there was no long introduction listing Richard's donations or business achievements. He rolled a small lectern to one side rather than stand at the center of the stage. Annie noticed that too. "Thank you for being here," he began. "Some of you attended our holiday program in November. That day, a young woman was selected to receive a mobility chair in this very building. We called her name, lit the stage, and congratulated ourselves on offering opportunity. But when her old wheelchair failed at the end of the aisle, she could not reach the gift we had placed here for her." The hall grew quiet. "She asked me for help. I told her I was busy." Richard did not soften the sentence or dress it up as a misunderstanding. "I had spent years believing that good intentions excused poor design, that giving equipment was enough even when we never asked whether a student could reach a classroom, a job, an apartment, or safety at home. Annie Carter taught me that access is not a photograph, and dignity is not something a donor hands down from a stage." Annie looked at Monica. Her mother had already abandoned the pretense of dry eyes. Richard continued, "This program has been redesigned with advisors who know these barriers because they live with them. They are not symbols. They are paid partners. The first of those advisors is a young woman who needed only 20 feet of help from me and ended up giving this foundation a much longer road to travel." He turned toward Annie. "Miss Carter, the microphone is yours." Annie moved toward the ramp. Her chair climbed it smoothly, almost silently. At the top, Richard did not stand beside her for a photograph. He stepped down from the stage and took a seat in the front row next to Monica. Annie settled at the microphone and looked across the room. She saw families, older couples, young people in wheelchairs, walkers in braces, volunteers with clipboards now trained to ask rather than assume. For a moment, her hands trembled. Then she found her mother's face. "A lot of people think the hardest thing about using a wheelchair is not being able to walk," she began. "Sometimes it isn't. Sometimes the hardest part is being in a room full of people who say they care, and still being left where no one bothers to reach you. No one shifted, no one looked away. I am grateful for my chair. I am grateful for my scholarship, but I did not need to become a sad story in order to deserve a future. Young people like me, especially Black students with disabilities, get used to being told to wait, to be patient, to be grateful for whatever reaches us. We get very good at making our needs sound small." She glanced at Richard. "The day I met Mr. Bennett, I asked him to push me a little way. He told me no. A few people turned toward him. Richard kept his eyes on Annie. He walked away," she said. Then he came back. "I am not telling you that because coming back erases walking away. It doesn't. I am telling you because people can choose differently once they finally see what their comfort has cost someone else." Monica pressed a tissue beneath her eyes. Annie looked toward the widened aisles and the broad ramp beneath her wheels. "Do not build a stage for us and call it inclusion if there is no clear way for us to reach it. Do not praise our strength while leaving us to struggle with barriers somebody else could have removed. Give us tools. Give us respect. Then let us tell you where we want to go." When she finished, the room rose slowly, not in the loud burst of an awards ceremony, but with the steady applause of people who understood they had been asked for more than admiration. Richard stood last. He did not clap above his head or look toward the cameras. He simply faced Annie and applauded until she smiled. Afterward, as Monica met her at the bottom of the ramp, Annie saw a little girl in a purple wheelchair waiting with her father near the information table. The girl looked from the ramp to Annie, then whispered something into her father's ear. "What did she say?" Annie asked as they passed. The father smiled. "She said she wants to go up there someday." Annie glanced back at the stage, then at the little girl. "Tell her the ramp is ready whenever she is." Outside, winter had not quite released the city, but sunlight was beginning to find the pavement again. In a few weeks, Annie would ride the accessible bus to her first college class, carrying books in the bag behind her chair, and a life no longer measured by whether someone else decided she was worth pushing forward. The first morning of Annie's spring semester arrived with sunlight on the kitchen floor and the smell of grits warming on the stove. Monica had been awake before the alarm. By the time Annie came from her bedroom, dressed in dark jeans and a soft blue sweater, her mother had packed apple slices, a turkey sandwich, and 2 oatmeal cookies into a paper bag. On the small table beside it sat a travel mug of coffee and a folded bus schedule, with the accessible routes highlighted in yellow. "Mom," Annie said, guiding her chair into the kitchen, "I know how to find the bus." "I know you know. And I know which stop is closest to the Student Services building." "I know that too. And I have my phone, my charger, my emergency button, and Miss Lane's number." Monica turned from the stove with a wooden spoon in her hand. "Are you saying I prepared too much for my daughter's first day of college?" "I'm saying you packed enough food for me to enroll in a second college after lunch." Monica smiled. "You will thank me when somebody else is paying $6 for a dry sandwich from a vending machine." Annie laughed and moved closer to the table. The apartment no longer looked temporary. Dorothy's secondhand bookshelf stood against the wall, filled with Annie's textbooks and a few framed photographs. June's casserole dish rested on top of the refrigerator. Beside the front door hung the wooden plaque Richard had brought on moving day. "Carter home." The red scarf Monica had knitted years earlier lay over the back of a chair. Annie reached for it. "You sure?" Monica asked. "It's almost 50 degrees outside. It's my first day scarf." Her mother's expression softened. She came around the table and wrapped it around Annie's neck. arranging one uneven end over her shoulder exactly as she had on the day of the holiday event. This time, there was no broken wheel beneath Annie. No fear that the chair would fail before she reached the next door. Her powered wheelchair was fully charged, a navy backpack fixed securely behind the seat. Inside were her laptop, a social work textbook, a notebook, and the college ID card she had checked 3 times before going to bed. Monica placed a plate of eggs and grits on the table. Eat first. Dream later. Annie picked up her fork. I'm nervous. You should be. First days are allowed to scare you. What if everybody else already knows where to go? They don't. What if I get lost? Ask directions. What if I fall behind? Monica sat across from her. Then you ask for help before you decide you have failed. Annie looked down at her plate. She knew her mother was not talking only about college. A knock sounded at the door just after 8. Monica rose, but Annie was already smiling. Richard stood outside in a gray jacket and open-collared shirt, holding a slim folder instead of flowers or a gift bag. His car was parked along the curb behind the accessible bus stop. Good morning, he said. I hope I am not too early. You're safe, Annie said. My mother has already interrogated me about every possible college emergency. Monica leaned against the doorframe. Preparation is not interrogation. Richard stepped inside after she waved him in. He looked around the apartment with the restrained satisfaction of someone who understood he was visiting a home, not inspecting the result of a donation. I brought something for you to read when you have time, he said, handing Annie the folder. There is a summer internship opening at a disability youth resource center downtown. It is paid, and it has an accessible office. You would apply like anyone else. No special arrangements from me. Annie opened the folder enough to see the title. You're not going to call somebody and tell them to hire me? No. Not even a small billionaire phone call? He smiled. Not even a small one. Good. She tucked the folder into her backpack. Then I'll apply. Monica watched the exchange, then reached for her phone. Before anyone goes anywhere, I need one picture. Mom. 1. Your first day of college occurs only once, unless you plan to keep starting over for my benefit. Annie guided her chair toward the front door. Monica positioned her beside the Carter home plaque, straightened the edge of the scarf, and took 3 photographs instead of 1. In the last picture, Annie did not have to be told to sit tall. Outside, the concrete ramp was dry and clear. Patches of old snow remained in the shaded grass, but the air smelled of thawing soil and car exhaust rather than winter salt. At the curb, the bus shelter displayed the route number that would carry Annie to Tri-C. Richard walked behind her as she approached the top of the ramp. Out of habit, his hand lifted toward the handles of her chair, then stopped before touching them. Annie caught the movement and turned her head. He cleared his throat. Need me to push you a little way today? For an instant, neither of them spoke. The words belonged to another room, another season, another version of both of them. Annie stranded beneath a banner promising progress. Richard too occupied with appearing generous to notice what kindness required. Annie placed one hand on her control stick. I can go by myself today. Richard nodded. I thought you might say that. She eased the chair forward. It moved down the ramp in one smooth line, the wheels humming softly against the concrete. No scrape, no sudden halt, no pair of burning shoulders trying to force an old chair through a world that had not made room for her. At the bottom, Annie stopped and turned back. Monica stood on the small porch, one hand pressed to her mouth. Richard remained at the top of the ramp, smiling as though stepping aside had become one of the finest things he had ever learned to do. Annie lifted an eyebrow at him. But you can walk beside me for a little while, she said, if you're not too busy. Richard laughed, then came down the ramp. I'm not too busy. He walked beside her toward the bus stop while Monica followed a few steps behind, still pretending she was not crying. At the shelter, a little girl sat in a purple wheelchair next to her father, a school backpack hanging from the chair handles. Annie recognized them from Access Day. The girl brightened when she saw her. You're the lady who talked on the stage. Annie smiled. I told my dad I want to do that someday. Then you should. The little girl glanced at Annie's college backpack. Are you going to school? First day. Are you scared? Annie looked at the waiting bus as its lift began to unfold toward the curb. She thought about the old apartment, her mother's tired hands, the scholarship folder, the night she pressed a button because she finally believed help was allowed to come. A little, she said. But being scared doesn't mean you have to stay where you are. The girl nodded seriously, storing the words away. The driver secured the lift and greeted Annie. Morning. Heading to Tri-C? Yes, sir. First day? She smiled. First day. Annie guided her chair onto the lift by herself. Before it rose, she looked back. Monica waved with both hands now. No longer trying to hide her tears, Richard stood beside her, not in front, not behind, simply there. Months earlier, Annie had asked one man to push her 20 feet because her name had been called, and she could not reach the place where her future was waiting. He had failed her first. Then he had returned. Now the lift carried her upward, her backpack secure, her scarf warm against her neck, and her own hand on the controls. She had not been given a life. She had been given room to claim one. As the bus door closed, Annie raised her hand in farewell, then turned toward the aisle ahead. This story reminds us that kindness is not measured by the money we give, the speeches we make, or the praise we receive. It is measured by whether we notice the person struggling in front of us and choose to help with respect. Annie did not need pity. She needed a fair chance, a safe home, and people willing to believe in her future. Richard learned that a mistake does not have to define a person if they have the humility to turn back and do better. Most of all, the story teaches us that true compassion does not carry someone forever. It clears the path so they can move forward with dignity, strength, and hope. This video is a work of fiction created with the assistance of artificial intelligence. All characters, events, and situations are not real, and do not represent any actual people or true stories. The content is intended for storytelling and emotional illustration only.